short as I can, which is um, like I said before, this month is the new leadership month. And Rotary uses a quote of Churchill, Winston Churchill, and it says, to improve is to change, and to be perfect is to change often. And of course, today, Jeffrey and Bill will enlighten us about what did this disaster, what does the pandemic mean for ShelterBox, and how did they react and respond in this very even challenging, I think, crisis and pandemic. So, so first, I would like to welcome again Jeffrey. I think many of you know him. He's the PRID from Rotary International, and he's in the board of ShelterBox USA. Jeffrey, you are so welcome. Please.
Thank you so much, Simone. Hello, everyone. It's a privilege to be here with you today, and especially to see some familiar faces. Nan McCready and I were training leaders together in San Diego. My goodness, 2010, I think, Nan, maybe. The bonds that you develop with the fellow international training leaders at the International Assembly are lifelong, and Nan is one of those, and I'm just so pleased to see you, Nan. I haven't seen you in years in person or on Zoom. I look forward to the next time our paths will cross.
Last time in Hamburg.
Yeah, Hamburg, yeah. I'm going to turn it over in a minute to Bill Tobin. Bill is on our staff at ShelterBox, in charge of our Rotary relations here in the U.S. For those of you who don't know, ShelterBox Trust, which is based in Cornwall, England, is the mothership, the parent organization. ShelterBox USA is an affiliate of theirs. And ShelterBox USA, I'm absolutely privileged to have been recently appointed to their board of directors. I'm not sure if it's the first time, Bill. I know that we've had Rotarians on the board of ShelterBox USA. I'm not sure if there's ever been a past director. And simultaneous with that, Rotary International gets to appoint a member to the ShelterBox Trust board every year. And that person is one of my colleagues for 2 years on the board of directors, Yinka Babaloa from Africa. So I spent a fair amount of time yesterday on a Zoom call with Inga and Angie, who are the partnership managers for the partnership with RI and the ShelterBox Trust. ShelterBox is the first service partner for Rotary International for the organization, and that's why the Rotary logo appears on all of our ShelterBox products right alongside the ShelterBox logo. And my goal, Yinka's goal, Sanj, who's our CEO at ShelterBox Trust, Carrie, who's the executive director at ShelterBox USA, our goal is over the next couple of years to elevate that partnership. ShelterBox can indeed be a management or a method of engagement for Rotarians. In fact, there were Rotarians who belong to Rotary specifically because they engaged with ShelterBox. There are Rotarians who have stayed in Rotary, particularly because of their relationship with ShelterBox. And so ShelterBox can be an engagement tool for us to not only retain members, but to get new members in our clubs. And Bill will speak more to you, I'm sure, about the work that we do around the world in response not only to natural disasters, but also to the crisis that's around us because of the refugee crisis around the world. So again, it's a privilege to be here. I'm going to turn it over to Bill, who's got a lot of good information for you. It's a privilege to be here with you today. And thank you on behalf of the organization for all that each of you do for Rotary International, and for the Rotary Foundation and ShelterBox. Bill, take it away.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey and Simone and Ola. It's great to see you. We've had so many emails back and forth. I think I know you fairly well by now. So it's great to be here today, and I'm going to share my screen and we'll get the show on the road. Let's see here. Give it just a second for everyone to be able to view that. How's that look, Simone? Thumbs up? Okay, perfect. You know, I love the theme for this new Rotary year, Serve to Change Lives. That really resonated with me when I thought about the origins of ShelterBox. That was what the Helston Lizard Club in Cornwall, England experienced when they began doing their ShelterBox Millennial Project. Now, their idea, their goal, was to reach 8 to 10 families each and every year after disaster strikes and hand deliver to those families a tent and other aid items in a big green shelter box. Well, like all good Rotary ideas, the club next door wanted to help, the club in the next district wanted to help, the club over in the Europe wanted to help, and before you knew it, they had several Rotary Club partners on board. And the first ShelterBox deployment of aid went to 143 families after an earthquake and landslide in India, and ShelterBox hasn't stopped since. The center, of course, the center of focus is shelter, hence the name. And we have several different tent options. I know when you see a ShelterBox tent at an event, typically you just see one version of the tent, but we have several versions of the tent, some very specific for weather conditions, some very nondescript because you don't always want to stand out in a crowd, or the UN spec tent is a general tent used by many different organizations. And we always listen to the feedback from the families we serve. That's always been a part of what we do, hearing about how the impact has been made. And that's been instrumental in changing our design options here and there and improvements to our tents. And it was one of the factors where we learned that tents are not always the practical or preferred item. Homes could be repaired using high-strength tarpaulins. The advantage include larger and customizable living spaces and obvious increased uses for repurposing once you're able to establish a more permanent home. So tarps provide a more resistant barrier to the environment than natural materials that families often use. And our shelter kits also contain tools and other items, and they're typically accompanied by a smaller green shelter box, which holds other household items. We have 96 different aid items that we can supply currently. Some like water filters, mosquito nets, blankets. So these help keep families safer from illness. Other items like tools and tarps and fasteners and ropes will help to rebuild not only homes, but livelihoods. We continue to learn and evolve. We want to grow our capacity, and the best way to do that efficiently is by reaching out to the families we've helped and see where and how we can improve our impact. Now, one big change in our 21 years, originally, everything was done in Cornwall, England. So the aid was purchased through suppliers or manufacturers, shipped to Cornwall, repacked into the iconic green box, and then shipped out to a disaster relief area. Now, our gear is shipped to pre-positioned areas. And after an assessment of disasters made, we can custom tailor the aid items needed to each individual disaster site. And the packing is often done at the time of distribution now. So we have found this to be a much more efficient and economical way to operate. In April of this year, you might have seen it in the Rotarian or Rotary magazine is what we're calling it this year. We surpassed sheltering 2 million people since our founding 21 years ago. That's, for a club that wanted to do 8 to 10 families a year, so maybe 100 people a year, to have reached 2 million people is just amazing. We helped 1 million over the first 15 and a half years, and the second million over the short span of just 5.5 years. So we are on an incredible capacity growth. However, as displacement numbers show, and these are very recent numbers that we sourced from the UNHCR and other sources, and they show we still have a big mission ahead. It is expected that changes in climate patterns and storm intensities will only drive disaster displacement figures higher. And the current number of people displaced by conflict is greater than the total of those driven from their homes through World War I combined.
Were you muted?
ShelterBox is no stranger to conflict-related response work. In fact, we've had over 100 deployments to help families displaced by violence. That represents over 1/3 of our total response work is in situations involving conflict. And it doesn't go unnoticed. ShelterBox was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for our work in conflict areas in both 2018 and again in 2019. From the first person we sheltered to number 2 million and on to 3 million, it's been Rotarians and their clubs who have been essential in the growth and success as this independent nonprofit organization. What grew from the single clubs project to help 8 to 10 families a year became a global affiliation of nonprofits and the official project partner for disaster relief with Rotary International since 2012. Now, at the heart of this partnership is, and Jeffrey mentioned a little bit about this, our volunteers. They give their time, they give their talents, they help ShelterBox grow worldwide. They build awareness, they fundraise, and even for some, they become qualified ShelterBox response team members. New Rotarians are found every year. People see ShelterBox first, then they learn about Rotary. Next thing you know, they're joining a club, maybe your club. Our mission really resonates with these young, extreme adventurists. We've had individuals do some amazing things to raise money and awareness for ShelterBox. Last year, Brittany is shown there on the left. She climbed all 58 mountains in Colorado that have peaks over 14,000 feet. And for those of you outside the US, that's 4,300 meters. It was over 232,000 vertical feet. And I didn't do the conversion for that, but that's a lot of meters. And she did them all with the ShelterBox on her back. She also inspired Chase, shown there on the right, and he is going to summit all 67 4,000 foot, or that's 1,200 some odd meters high summits in the New England states beginning next month. So you could follow along with him at shelterboxusa.org/second summits. And right now, son of a Rotarian, he's 30 years old, Jesse Pine is in the middle of an epic bike ride from Lake Tahoe, Nevada to Homer, Alaska. That's 6,100 kilometers. And he's calling that the Ride for Shelter. And yes, he is towing a ShelterBox the entire distance. So these young adults are learning a lot about Rotary through their ShelterBox experience. And young adults, I mean, that's one of our key target areas to grow Rotary. So get the young adults involved with ShelterBox, and who knows, they might be your next new member. Because Rotary is really, it's in the DNA of everything we do at ShelterBox every single day. Our successful partnership with Rotary is a result of the efforts of an individual Rotarian, the clubs, all the way up to top leaders in Rotary. And as the world locked down last year, spring of 2020, it was General Secretary John Hugo who shared that ShelterBox has a vitally important part to play in the global response to COVID-19. Now, ShelterBox approached the pandemic, or is approaching, I shouldn't put that in the past tense as much as I want to. We're still in the midst of this pandemic, and we've approached it as simply another layer we have to work through to reach families in need, like a flooded road or downed trees or the complexities of war. We just had to adapt. We had to find a way through. We've always wanted to keep families together, one family, one tent, and get them out of crowded situations so they could be a family unit. We've never considered that social distancing, but lo and behold, it's exactly what that is. And that's what we're doing on this call. We're social distancing. Soaps and wash basins, those are items we didn't have in our arsenal of aid prior to the pandemic, but it made good sense to add those. And I don't think we'll ever see them disappear now, because even the common cold and flu, which kills millions every year, can be thwarted from spreading just by using soap and wash basins. So we provided families with items like cooking sets when we saw that they were being shared between families, just so we could keep families separated more. And of course, implementing the social distancing, the health training practices, even PPE in our assessments, our distributions, and even our post-distribution follow-up work. But more than anything else, our response team members are grounded. They couldn't travel internationally any more than anybody else. We didn't get any special exemptions with the pandemic. So we had to rely on existing partnerships like Rotary and several others. And we also found new partners to implement our response work. And without these partnerships, most of our work in 2020 simply would not have happened. And we were busy. We were quite busy. The pandemic didn't stop disasters from occurring, and conflict numbers increased in several areas. And through all that, we were still able to reach 33,000 households across 11 countries and 17 different relief efforts. Now, nowhere does the partnership shine brighter than in the Philippines. We have responded there 31 times, more than any other country, including several responses there in 2020. We were there so often that it just made sense to build a operations center in the Philippines. And since we have done that, and Rotarians, they played a huge part in the creation of SBOP, and they continue to work together before, during, and after disaster strike. The impact of adding SBOP has exceeded our expectations, reducing the average time from the onset of a disaster to the completion of the paperwork and saying we're done. We have been able to reduce that time by over a month. And on average, we're helping a family in the Philippines now for about $200 US. That really enabled us to reach 8,000 households last year. And we've also seen the need for temporary hospital space all over the world, and on the Philippines was no different. We had to help on the island of Cebu, where we did small hospital expansions. They were able to help 100 patients more each day, people who were able to come through and get their wounds sutured or what have you. It was the Philippines. They don't have the resources we see here in the United States. So something like this makes an incredibly big difference on an island like Cebu. Now, when the tall volcano forced families into overcrowded living conditions, that was before the big lockdown, and then the lockdown struck, and the Rotary Club of Batangas Midwest mobilized with SBOP, and they were able to deliver families materials they needed to create self-shelters, again, to get people to distance from one another. And right now, the tall volcano is, again, showing signs of eruption. So we have our eye closely on that currently. And 2020, the storm tracker from 2020, you can see the number of storms. It was a very active typhoon season. And COVID conditions were changing in the Philippines weekly. And we found times when even travel between islands was prohibited. And that was the case October 31st, when the Philippines was hit with the strongest storm to make landfall last year, Super Typhoon Goni, the strongest storm to hit the Philippines since Haiyan in 2013. And island-to-island travel was prohibited. So who do you call? This is when everyone shouts, Rotary! You call Rotarian, of course. You get that Rotary network fired up, and you see what you could do. And who else but a Rotarian was able to arrange the Philippine naval vessel and crew to transport our aid from Cebu over 500 miles north to the island of Luzon, where the families were affected by the typhoon. I love this quote by Alejandro: "A house makes a home where we could be ourselves." You think about that in the last year when we've all been masked up and, you know, staying away from one another, and finally we get to our own home and we can just be ourselves. Well, if your home's damaged or destroyed, you know, you don't have it. So we were able to supply Alejandro the materials he needed so that he could be himself with his family at home. Now, sometimes a disaster will alter the entire landscape, but not only taking your home, but also your land. And Nellie and her family experienced that last year in the Philippines. They received items they needed to help rebuild a new home in a new location. So the Philippines, just a shining example of Rotary in action. I'm sure people from various clubs here, we've all had projects in the Philippines. And you know, it's a great example of this partnership. After all, there's over 900 Rotary clubs in the Philippines and over 27,000 Rotarians. That's about one Rotarian in every group of 4,000 citizens. But what happens where Rotary is not so plentiful? The landscape is outside. I hope that doesn't disrupt this too much. What happens when Rotary is not so plentiful? ShelterBox responds in these areas too. They may not have the resources of Rotarians. They don't have resources otherwise. And so through this partnership, ShelterBox helps to extend Rotary's reach. I'll give you an example of that. Here's a map of our some of our recent response work, and it'll give you an idea of the scarcity of Rotary in many of these countries. Those in red have fewer than 500 Rotarians for the entire country, and in Syria, there is no Rotary. I mentioned in the Philippines, one Rotarian for about every 4,000 residents. That's what I call the Rotarian ratio. Here in the United States, with just under 300,000 members, there's about one Rotarian in every group of 1,100 people. By comparison, looking at Ethiopia, it's one Rotarian for every 250,000 people. In Sudan, there's one Rotarian in every group of 2.267 million people. In Sudan, there's just one Rotary Club, and the population there is 41 million. So that's an area where we recently did some work. I think there's a picture of that coming up in a little bit to share with you. Now, ShelterBox also extends Rotary's reach within the United Nations. We're members of the UN Shelter Cluster. That's a collaborative effort of over 40 aid agencies with these groups focused on the human displacement and their shelter needs. In addition to our global partnership with Rotary, ShelterBox also has global partnerships with both Habitat for Humanity and the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent. Global partnerships help keep a local face on the front end of our response work. Doing response work for ShelterBox is quite a bit different than doing polio eradication, immunization day type of trips. Going into disaster areas, you're going into chaotic situations. And it's very, very comforting for the locals to have that local connection. It can be very intimidating. Even though we're friendly people, we're Rotarians, it can still be very intimidating to have a foreign aid group come in and start trying to dictate what's going to go on. So it's very, very important to us. And you can see here in Malawi, before the lockdown, here we are doing a work with Habitat for Humanity. And Habitat for Humanity also has a global partnership with Rotary International. So the trifecta really came into, I think its most shining example real recently in Honduras. It was our aid that we got out of Panama, but it was the Rotary Club of San Pedro Sula and others, and Habitat for Humanity and their great volunteers in Honduras that really did the distribution of this work, from getting it from the warehouse out to what's known as the Mosquito Coast, where access is difficult even in normal conditions, and providing aid to over 3,000 families. Recently also in Odisha, India, they've had a long continued heavy rains earlier this year in along the southeastern coastal delta areas, and we would not have been able to reach these families without partners like Rotary and Habitat for Humanity. Working in areas of conflict, that presents quite a different set of complexities, and during the pandemic, these folks displaced by conflict are even at higher risk because health systems are typically already overstrained, hospitals could be destroyed or damaged, and just access to those in need can be very difficult. We're in Ethiopia right now. I should say we are, because we still can't travel, but our gear is in Ethiopia under the capable hands of the IOM. We have partnered with them before, and we have combined our resources here again, as the conflict in Tigray has now cost thousands of lives. And the latest UNHCR estimates are nearly 2 million people have been displaced in the last 8 months. Now, as people flee conflict areas, they go to the next safe town. That places an incredible humanitarian need in those towns. In a town like Shire, which you can see a little bit behind the gear here, the population of 50,000 has more than tripled in recent months, and it's not uncommon for 1,000 or more people to arrive each and every day. Our aid doesn't always come in a green box, and that's perfectly okay by us, even unbranded at times, and that's perfectly okay with us because it's about the families we serve, not the name on the side of a tent. But logistically, when a shelter box and the branding or whatever doesn't fit into the operations plan or a response timeline, we utilize other means to package our aid. And oftentimes when we are combining our forces with other agencies, it's a larger package of aid that is all put together. And so families need to be able to take that away with them. So tarps and ropes, tools, household items, hygiene kits, this will make a big difference for these families. The future is uncertain in Ethiopia. It seems like every week there's a different direction being taken. But for now, for thousands of families we've been able to help so far, some household needs are being met and they're able to shelter themselves. Now in Syria, where there is no Rotary, a March 2020 headline in the New York Times read, "Syrian children freeze to death. Bombs rain down and nobody cares." That's pretty heavy. You can't just wish conflict away, and you can't not care it away. It's not going to stop. Can't pretend it isn't real. Can't ignore it. A country without a single Rotary Club, surely someone must care. ShelterBox cares, and we've been working in Syria for several years. The Syrian crisis began in March 2011 with peaceful protests calling for government reforms. Often the marchers would carry roses, but over the span of just a few weeks, it descended into the violence and now has lasted quite some time. The conflicts caused the displacement of over half of all Syrians. ShelterBox has been responding to this crisis since 2012. We started with refugee camps in Jordan and Lebanon, Iraq, even as far away as Greece. We've helped displaced families in Syria. We've helped over 400,000 people in total, and 250,000 of those inside the country of Syria. Syria is a country with incredible humanitarian needs. Last fall in the northwest of Syria alone, over 2.5 million people displaced. And sadly, we are seeing increases within that displaced population in gender-based violence, in child labor, and worse. By the end of 2021, the war in Syria will have lasted longer than World War I and World War II combined. We've done several wintertime responses in Syria over several years now, where I mentioned children freezing to death. And yes, there's dozens of cases documented of children and adults freezing to death because they lack the very basics to keep them warm, and shelter is certainly one of those things. We need to keep these families alive. We use several partners in our work in Syria, some of them listed here, but the ones that are the true heroes are the locals, the local Syrian relief workers helping one another. They risk their lives every day to reach families in need. Smaller distribution sizes, well, that means longer distribution times, and the longer you're out on a distribution, the more potential that you will be targeted. And like those who still occupy the shelled building you see in the background behind this truck of our aid arriving in Idlib, an entire generation is growing up knowing nothing but war. Our winter response in Syria, you see on the list here, there's some different items: carpets, mattresses. We do carpets and we do mattresses. We got to get people up off that cold ground. A lot of these tents have floors, but a lot of the tents they use, which may or may not come from us, don't have floors. So it's important we give them the items they need to survive. And that includes warm winter coats. We've had onesies for toddlers, adult-sized warm winter gear. We helped over 1,600 families just in Idlib, Syria last winter. They were all displaced already once in 2020, so being displaced a second time, maybe a third time. So when you get displaced in this time of year, well, at least those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, this time of year, the last thing you think about taking with you in a hurry is going to be your winter coat. And then when you find yourself in the freezing throngs of Syrian winter, and it gets at or below freezing there, what difference does the temperature make if it's cold enough to die? This tent, this is a winterized tent, so it's a little bit more heavy duty than our standard tents. It provides Amira with shelter, but she shared all of the aid items are important to us because we had no blankets, we had no kitchen utensils, and we couldn't afford to buy them because prices are so high. Amira even put her green shelter box to good use. It's now a place where they're going to store their clothes. So our work continues. This is a map of where we are now, or what we're looking at closely. And I like showing this way with different colors because it's not like a 911 call and the ambulance arrives and then figures it out. With disaster relief, there's a lot of different phases. And to be most effective, you got to be very smart how you approach this stuff. So assessing areas, planning responses, implementing it, and then the most important part of all, the post-distribution monitoring, making sure we did no harm, making sure the impact we made is long-lasting and it's an improvement upon where we started. So far this year, we've helped over 12,000 households to date. So thank you, Ola. Thank you so much for having me here, Mr. President. Wonderful start to your Rotary year. I wish you all the success. And I'm going to stick around for your new member inductions because I'm the district membership chair, and I love seeing new members being inducted into Rotary. So if there's time for questions, I'd be happy to take them, or Jeffrey as well. So thank you so much, Ola, and Simone as well.
Well, thank you, Bill, so much for this very impressive presentation. I mean, impressive I can talk about many of the pictures. One of the pictures I saw a small uh, a young girl, and she was wearing a Christmas tree, and then you think like, oh, with Christmas tree, we have all these warm feelings, and here she is in Syria. Um, I could ask you a lot of questions, but I want to give the floor to other people. Is anyone having a question? Because then I will mute and please um, raise your hand or just unmute.
Well, this would be a record if there was absolutely no questions.
Yeah, you were so impressive, Bill. I can totally understand. It takes a lot to.
This is Mel and Judy Talk. Not really a question, but I just want to say your program is beyond wonderful. We've been associated with you all for the last 30 years off and on. So just thought I'd comment that you have the credibility that very few people of this sort do in the world. And it's been a great privilege to work with you in the past. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm sure anyone who has a question wants to say. Let me say in between that one of the things, Bill, I think is very interesting indeed what you say is that how attractive ShelterBox is for young people. I had been working for 5 years here in the Netherlands very intensively and working together with exchange students, with Rota actors or Ryla. And what I found out also with presentations with Rotary Club that last 2 years I developed a workshop, and basically what this gives the opportunity for people who are interested in ShelterBox to step into the shoes of a qualified ShelterBox response team member. And I've offered Ola, and because I'm mentioning it now, because I see that also people outside of our club are listening. So if people are interested, I'm developing this workshop in a way that we can do it online. And basically, because I think already, Bill, your presentation shows what I say in the Netherlands, we're not Santa Claus, right? We're not just, going there and giving away some boxes. It's really challenging what people have to do. Give one example, and I spoke to a ShelterBox response team member who was in 2013 in Lebanon, and they take very strong measurements because they were afraid maybe they would keep pregnant. It was like, whoa, this is so different dimension on how difficult and how this work is. And I think you know the examples of people who work with polio and sometimes get shot at. So suddenly you see like they're very brave, and it makes you very humble, to be honestly, to realize what those local people mean, and in the end, they make it effective. But that's my only problem because I know so much I can't keep on talking. So, is there anyone else maybe who wants to ask or say something?
I had a question. When will this workshop be available?
Well, basically, the workshop is ready. I've done it in the Netherlands with six Rotary clubs, and I've developed it everything. Of course, it is in English, basically, but so far I have done it only in the Netherlands, so it was in Dutch. So it would be great if I could do like a test one, and people can give me feedback how to improve it maybe, because doing it live or on screen. But we've done it, and so far people feel the impact certainly so much easier. I mean, you feel that what kind of difficult decision making it involves with being part of ShelterBox, and I think you even get more to admire more what ShelterBox is doing.
Well, and I could add to that real quick that we have some programs designed for youth. That was one thing you mentioned, Simone. So we do have a RILA, and I don't know if that's a global program, but we have a RILA. We put you through a mock disaster, and it really involves some high stakes decision making. If you have enough aid for 2,000 people, but there's 4,000 in need, how do how do you apply the four-way test of that? How can you be fair to all concerned when you don't have enough for all? It's very enlightening and very educational. And not only is it good for RILA, but we've done this also with Rotary clubs and with corporations as corporate team building experiences. So we also, in fact, the last time I saw Jeffrey face to face was down in Mexico, and we were there together at the NIAN, North American Rotary Youth Exchange Network conference. And we have plenty of things to do for the youth exchange students, which is, you know, people from all over the world come to your community for them to learn that ShelterBox has been in their country before. You get that wide-eyed, you know, oh my goodness, and they realize, wow, Rotary has all these different ways of reaching people around the world, and ShelterBox is one of those ways that Rotary supports that to happen. So definitely, we do seem to resonate with the younger crowd. And that's a good thing, because the more the younger crowd learns about Rotary through ShelterBox, the better it is for both organizations to grow.
So this is offered online also and face-to-face, these workshops?
The one that Simone's talking about is something that this club would be doing, but at ShelterBox, we're available to do we call it high stakes leadership, and we're able to do those. You can bring presidents from your district or, you know, an entire club. We run you through some scenarios of those decision-making processes that our response team people make every single response. So, and also, if you live in the United States, which I know you do, we do have an in-person, we call it SAFE, which is ShelterBox Ambassador Field Experience. And you don't have to be an ambassador to do that. And it's down outside of Austin, Texas. It's over a 3-day weekend, and we put you through the ringer. It's not real physical. It is. You need to be able to put a tent up, but we aren't going to have you marching 10 miles or anything like that. But we will throw some scenarios in front of you and other people in your group that you'll have to work through. And everything we do there is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because we want to have fun along the way in this scenario, but it's all stems from actual field experiences that our response team members have gone through. So, you know, one of the things that, one of the decisions we have to make is whether or not we're going to deploy. What's the criteria for that? It's not just, hey, look, there's a disaster, let's make a plan and go. It's much more involved than that. So you learn a lot more about all of that when you do some of these more specialized training seminars. So I'm sure Simone's and the clubs here will be fantastic. But also, if that doesn't work out on your schedule, just send me an email, and I'd be happy to make sure you're included in our next ones. Or we'll form one. Yes, Nan, I see your hand up.
It's interesting to hear you, great presentation. It's great, interesting to hear you talk about learning how to put the tents up, etc. Because many years ago, not long after ShelterBox had started, we were loaned a ShelterBox for my district, which we took to a local fair where there was about 5 clubs involved. And you have no idea how many Rotarians it takes to put up a shelter tent.
Yes, anywhere between 1 and there's just not enough. That's how many it takes. We recently in District 6840, down that's in the New Orleans area, they had what they called an intense, INTENTS, intense competition between all the clubs of who could put the tent up most efficiently and quickest. And they had a great picture of a very small club, and their tent's almost done. And a very big club, I won't mention their name, but they are centered in New Orleans, and their tent was still completely on the ground. And it just goes to show you that small clubs could accomplish great things.
Absolutely.
And if Bill, if I could just add, you know, in Rotary in general, we've always talked to ourselves. We've always talked to an inward-facing audience. We talk to the choir, if you will. And I've told Bill this story. I was speaking in an event pre-pandemic up in New England. It was a multi-district event. There were probably 500 Rotarians. And my hotel room happened to face the entrance to the hotel. And the ShelterBox that they had there was set up outside of the hotel. Often it's in the ballroom or in a hallway, hidden, but it was outside. And all of the Rotarians that were entering the event stopped by. A lot of them wanted to go in the tent and see what was involved with it. But what I also noticed that there were cars driving by that detoured into the parking lot and got out to see what this thing was. What was this tent set up in front of this hotel? And pedestrians who were walking by also detoured in and wanted to know what this was all about. And so these were non-Rotarians. This was an outward-facing audience, and they were very interested. And some of them became engaged and wanted to know how they could help, and got to learn a little more about Rotary. More and more in our organization, whether it's a club event, a district event, a zone event, even an international event, we need to start talking to outward-facing audiences as well as inward-facing audiences. It's why we renamed the magazine Rotary rather than The Rotarian. A, so that we can engage Rotaractors, but B, because the Rotary magazine is now, and I happen to know this as chair of the RI Communications Committee, the articles in the Rotarian are as much